Hi everyone, it's Deb Canham. Hope you've all had a good 2 weeks, because of course I've been away 2 weeks. Tonight we're going to be working on the serger, and we're going to be really looking at differential feed, because that's such a huge factor for the serger. And then at the end I'm just going to give you a quick demo on how to do rolled edge on napkins, because I'm sure lots of people are doing that. But I really feel that there's a lot of questions coming up on social network sites where if people use their differential feed, they would find things much better. So I'm really going to hit that tonight. And before I turn the camera around, I'm just going to show you this t-shirt, which I made some while ago and you have seen. And it's full of cover stitch hem. And I just want to say that with my what I did with that was I just pressed up the edges. And then I used my differential feed and I sewed all the way around and I got a perfect hem. And I know a lot of people like to use stabilizing tape and all sorts of things like that. And yes, I'm not objecting to that, but I think you reduce the stretch sometimes unless it's a wash away. And actually, if you get your tensions right and you use your differential feed, you actually don't need stabilizing tape. I just pressed it and sewed it. So I can see you all coming in. Thanks for coming along tonight, and let's get on with the next bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you things that I have used the differential feed for, and then I'm going to show you how it works and the advantages of it. So let me turn you around, because that's always a challenge for me. I don't know if I don't press hard enough or what. Whoops, hasn't turned. Okay, now you've got a picture of nothing, I know. Okay, so let's get you sorted, and I will be moving the camera, so look away if you get giddy. Well, the best thing about the differential feed is that it just makes seams better. And, you know, I want to say that the sewing machine is an awesome machine. But there's some things that the serger does better, and certainly working with knits is one of them. And I know a lot of people try knits on their sewing machine and then they say, well, I don't really like knits, I can't work with it. And I get why, because with the sewing machine, they're always going to stretch. And of course, there's such a huge range of knits. Some are super stretchy, some slightly less, but they're always going to stretch on the sewing machine. So you're really at an advantage if you use your serger. So what I didn't tell you, which I meant to tell you, was the t-shirt I have on tonight I made on the serger. And I actually made it on the Vibrant, the Baby Lock Vibrant, which is the most affordable serger in our line. And I also made this little top for my granddaughter Claire. And I particularly like this because I think it really shows what I'm trying to say. Now, there was a post up this week of somebody who'd made this, clearly on the sewing machine, and they found that this seam here really, really stretched. And so it ended up sort of like dog's jowls, and it actually stretched up and over the band. So that's something that I would expect to happen on the sewing machine. But the advantage of the serger is we can use the differential feed to compensate for the stretch and get rid of that and have this really nice flat seam. And let me tell you, this is Patterns for Pirates. I've made it in a size to fit me. Clearly this isn't one. But this is actually just the leftovers of my jacket that I've made for my granddaughter. But it's a really soft, really soft sweater knit. And I think you'd agree that the seams are lovely in it. So another thing I did this week, well, actually in the last 2 weeks, I can't say this week, I made these leggings. They're actually for my daughter-in-law for Christmas. And sorry, I actually used, and this is the best fabric for leggings. It's double brushed polyester spandex, and it stretches in 4 directions. And of course, you need it to stretch in four different directions, otherwise you won't be able to bend over safely. So this is a very stretchy fabric. And again, I sewed it on the serger using a 4-thread overlock. that's really your best stitch when you're doing knits. And in actual fact, on the Vibrant, it doesn't say 4-thread overlock. It's, when you look in their guide, it says stretch stitch. So that was interesting. But these were also done on the Vibrant. So those are knits I've done. Actually, I've got another little, I'm not really addicted to doing these cardigans. Isn't that cute? That's another sweater knit for Claire. And actually another pair of leggings, well, I've just showed you one. So we'll move those. So yes, so differential feed when you're using knits is so important. And there's really never a time when you're sewing a knit, unless it's a ponte or something, which barely stretches, that you shouldn't be using your differential feed. So when at other times we use the differential feed? Well, we use the differential feed when we do gathering. So here is my pretty purse. And you can see here it has a ruffle, this yellow ruffle, and that is done using the differential feed. That's how we gather. This is actually I know you've seen some of these before, but they're just the best way to show you examples of what we're doing. This is actually a puffing panel. All it is I did use the Baby Lock gathering foot on with this, but you could do it with your ruffler foot. But what I want you to know is that I use the differential feed on 2 to gather. And as I said, I will explain more about differential feed. So we've established that we're going to use the differential feed on knits, absolutely. And let me just say that fleece is something else that stretches, so that's something else I'd use it on. So we'd use it on knits. And another time that it's a really good idea to use it is if you're doing heavy decorative stitching. And I don't know how much you'll be able to see this, but hopefully you will. So when I finish this, I get excited when I've nearly finished something, because that's my aim these days, to finish things. So if you can see this bottom section, I think you might see that it's actually quite wavy. Do you see that? This stitch here? That's my Wonderful 8 weight variegated razzle, and it's stretched. And this is sewing it through Bosal, but you know, you should expect it to stretch because that's a thick old thread sewing right on the edge of the fabric. And while this is a woven stretch too. So it's stretched along here, and you can see it doesn't lie really flat. So I immediately realized I'd forgotten to use my differential feed. But do you see how nicely all the other sides lay flat? Because I used the differential feed. So, you know, that's something that people don't often think to do, to use differential feed when you're working on a woven. And another time, and I don't have a sample of this, is if I'm working on a stitch and it's not coming out as well as I'd like it, then I consider using the differential feed to see if I can make it better before I change my threads or stitch. And sometimes it is the answer. So that's all I'm going to show you on samples. What I'm going to do now is move you again over to the machine. And I'm going to give you an explanation on how this differential feed works. So what it is, on the sewing machine, you have one set of feed dogs, but the serger is so way superior. I know I'm teasing. I love my sewing machine. But on the serger, you have 2 sets of feed dogs. You have a full set here, and then you have a full set at the back. And when you move your differential feed lever, and in most cases it is a lever, whichever machine you're using, this is my differential feed. At the moment it's on normal, but if I put it all the way up to 2, and for some of you, your differential feed might be around the side, because not everybody has a Triumph. If you put it all the way up to 2, what happens is these feed dogs at the front here, they feed the fabric in faster. And at the back, they still actually go the same pace. But what it's doing is it's compensating for any stretch. So let me take that step further. When we're working on the serger, our good old knife comes along and cuts it. And then directly behind it is the stitch finger, because on the serger, the stitch actually forms around the stitch finger and then it's laid onto the fabric, which is why you can sew a wool fabric and then sew a silk using the same type of tension possibly. It's not going to tunnel up your fabric like it does on the sewing machine when you use something like a zigzag, because only your needles are going in the fabric, the others are wrapping round. They're wrapping round the stitch finger and being laid onto it. So what happens when sometimes you'll find that you're stitching and you'll find that the knife's cutting it, but by the time it's getting back to the stitch finger, it's actually short of the edge and you have stitches falling off the edge. Well, let me explain why that happens. So here is a knit and it's got cut by the machine, but by the time it gets back to the stitch finger, let me clear my stitch finger, it's actually short of the stitch finger. And I can explain why that happens, because when it passes under the foot, it stretches between the time it's cut to the time it reaches the stitch finger. And let me show you what happens when you elongate something. When you stretch it, it narrows. And so your stitch falls off the edge of the fabric. Now what that is your machine telling you that you need to increase the differential feed. If you increase the differential feed, it will compensate for the stretch and your fabric will reach all the way to the edge of the stitch finger. And I know some people say, well, you can just use, in the case of the Triumph, you can just move your automatic stitch selector to B and that will compensate. Yes, it will, but it won't stop the stretch that is occurring. And if you have something like the Valiant, again, you can increase the amount of fabric you're cutting, but that actually won't stop the stretch. And stretch knit seams are very wavy and not attractive and not what you want. So you use your differential feed to compensate for your stretch. Another thing that can also affect working with knits or anything which is stretching under the foot is your foot pressure. Let me show you where my foot pressure is. My foot pressure knob is here. And it depends where you are. I know on the Valiant it's at the back at the top. But have a look at your pressure. You know, to have it midway. If you have it really tight, then yes, things are going to stretch. So that's basically having a look at working with knits and differential feed. And I did say to you that if we're going to gather something, we're going to increase the feed dog speed and it's going to gather. But let me tell you, it's not going to gather a heavy velvet or any heavy fabric. It's only going to gather a lightweight fabric. So I think that pretty much talks about differential feed. There are times when you wouldn't use it. I don't ever use it when I'm working on, when I'm using the knit binder that goes on this machine. And the reason for that is that the knit binder, the fabric stretches through the binder and I don't think it needs any more added. And I think too, because you have a double fold on the underside, then you have the neckline, then another double fold, it tends to compensate the bottom piece of fabric, so your neckband will end up slightly twisted. So that's a time when I wouldn't use it. And there's another time when I wouldn't use it. Oh, another time I wouldn't use it would be something like this blanket stitch on this jacket. And the reason I wouldn't use it, or the reason I didn't use it on this, but I might change my opinion on it, but this is one of the reasons why, is I actually use the solvi on the top here, and that is actually stable. So I didn't need to worry about the fabric stretching. And in actual fact, it would have kind of gathered it. And the other time to that is if I am going to use that stabilizing tape in the bottom of a cover stitch hem, because you've already stabilized your fabric, so it's not going to stretch. So don't use the differential feed when you're doing a cover stitch hem with stabilizing tape in. So I think that's about as much as I want to say about differential feed. I want to add that if your stitch isn't perfect, try it again while increasing your differential feed. But, you know, do make use of it. It's such a huge benefit of a serger. And I think people are reluctant to do that. And I'm not going to use it on my napkins, but if I was having a problem with it stretching, I would. And the reason I know that is because, of course, I've already tested it out. So let's look at doing napkins. It came up this week that somebody said, how do you do napkins and go around the corners? Well, as far as going around the corners, yes, you can go around corners on the serger. And yes, I occasionally do, but very rarely when I'm using decorative thread. And the reason being that you tend to get a little extra bit of stitching on the corner as you pull the stitches off the stitch finger to go around the corner. So for something like this, I'm not going to go and do it that way. And if somebody does, that's fine. It's just not the way I do it. So for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down one side, then the other side, then the other side, then the other side. And I'm going to end up with 4 thread chains. And that's fine. You know, I can live with 4 thread chains. And the other reason for that is I'm only using a single piece of fabric. And sometimes when you go around corners and you come in again, you can find the fabric moves slightly. So let me just run a couple of sides so I can show you that, because it will probably happen to me. You know it will happen to me. Whenever I demo, it happens. So let me just, oh, I need a foot. I'm using my regular foot. And one other thing I want to say, because it's just come to my mind, is if I'm doing construction on a garment or anything like that, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to use my metal foot, not my plastic see-through one. My plastic see-through one has its place, but I think the metal one is so much firmer, and I think it meets the feed hooks in a much better way than the plastic one does. So just running this side, and I'm going to give you the, you know something, this is funny. You know I always do something wrong. I forgot to put my differential feed down to 2, but it'll act as a lesson. So that's what happens if you don't put your differential feed on normal. Gosh, I only had one thing to demo and I got that wrong. Right, let me just do the other sides. Actually not. I might have another piece of, no, I haven't. Right, I'll cut that off. So what I was going to say was I will give you all the settings I have for this rolled hem. So this is a napkin. Right side of napkin is up. And I'm just going to sew one side. And I have already tested my stitch. So at this point, see what a nice rolled hem it did? And let me tell you that I'm actually using 12 weight thread, and it's wonderful accent. I haven't used it before, but I like it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make sure my needle's at the highest point. I'm going to lift my foot. I could just lift the toe. And I'm going to put my stitch and fabric right back to the edge of the knife. You're always going to be cutting fabric when you're working on a rolled hem. And what happens sometimes, because I'm just using a single layer, is it's reluctant to the fabric pushes forward. I don't know how much of that you can see, probably very little. But what I'm going to do, as soon as I've got my fabric and my needle into the fabric, I'm going to lift the foot and just release the fabric. And that will sort it out. So I'll show you that again. It's because I'm using a single layer of fabric for this napkin. If it was something firmer, it wouldn't be a problem. So I'm going to make sure my knife's at the highest point, and I'm going to lift this and put it right under my foot. Now, because I'm using a rolled hem, I need to cut something, so I can't put it all the way back to the needle, which may have made it easier, but I have to cut something off. Okay, so I'm in the fabric. I'm just going to lift the foot, release the fabric. Okay. Last time, I'm just going to make sure my needle is high, because the reason I want my needle high is when my needle's high, my knife is high. In the fabric, just releasing it. Now you can see this is rather a small napkin. It's probably from my Christmas elf, or the elf on the shelf, or probably more like goblins in my house. But anyway, here it is. And isn't that nice? Nice sharp corners. Much nicer than trying to go around them, I think. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some fray block on it. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to go to the iron and I'm going to press it. And I'm going to press it until it's dry. And then I'm going to cut that tail right off. But if you use a iron on top of it, it will dry softer. So that's why I do that. I know some of you have the bottle that you tip up and squirt on there. Just be careful of that. What happens is you tip the bottle up, squirt it, and nothing comes out. So then you squeeze harder and a huge blob comes out, and it can mark your fabric. So I sometimes put that on with a toothpick just so that I can control it a little better. So that is rolled hem. And that actually is all I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the setup for that, because I'm sure some of you will be making napkins. Super quick and easy on the serger. So let me move. I'm going to move you so you can see the piece of paper with all my settings on. These are the settings for the Triumph. So you've got a rolled hem set up on the Triumph, 02 needle, used 12 weight decorative thread. I used wonderful accent. And I used a width of M. I used a length of 1.5 R. Remember that R is really important. Thank you very much, Eva. The width is M. The length is 1.5 R. That is the rolled section. Remember, you have two sets of numbers. One's normal, one's rolled. And then my automatic stitch selector on D. Now, I'm going to try and add in more of the vibrant settings next year when I do these things. So when I give you this, I can give you two sets of instructions. But what else have I been doing? Well, I really enjoy, this is not serger related, but I thought I'd share it with you because I had them in the house, because I've been working on them today. I made some dolls. I really like making soft dolls, cloth dolls. Aren't they cute? So I know some of you really enjoy them. And I gave them all grey hair, and I think it's because I'm getting older. I used to give them pink and black hair, but now they all have grey hair. And then this is my original one, which some of you might have seen, Charlotte. And she is actually available in a pattern on my website.